If I could ask you to fill in the blank, I am remarkable because, what would you fill it in at?
That's a hard question. But I am remarkable because despite experiencing many different barriers throughout my life, I have lived a life full of joy and live life on my terms.
Lived a life of joy on your own terms, really making it happen in whatever context you are given.
Yeah, and even when that was actually the hardest thing to do, that's what I always prioritized.
Tell me about a time that you had to make that happen.
So as a South Asian woman who experiences disability, not only do I face physical barriers, attitudinal barriers, societal barriers, I also face lots of cultural barriers as well. So I really had to fight to be independent. I had to, convince my parents that despite being a South Asian woman, it was okay for me to go out on my own, when I guess all they wanted to do was wrap me up in cotton wool because of the condition that I lived with. So lots of different examples and experiences that I can give, but I think so many experiences always compounded all of my identities though at the same time. So sometimes it's hard to decipher what was because of what reason. Does that make sense?
It does. So you're thinking like what, in any particular situation, what is the cause of that situation? Whether or not the cause is your gender identity, your disability identity, or your identity as a woman of color.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a scenario from your childhood maybe, or that you experienced that kind of brought that first initially across to you?
I have one example, a very clear example actually, when I was 16 years old and I was transitioning from pediatric care into adult care for my health. And I remember the consultant asking me whether I wanted to have kids at the age of 16. And I guess he didn't realise that this was the first time anyone had ever asked me this question. However, in the South Asian community, as a woman, you're told that getting married and having kids is the biggest thing that you'll ever do in your life. But I was always excluded from those conversations or overlooked or just never considered to be involved in those conversations. So when the consultant asked me at 16, I was really shocked. This was the first time somebody had ever asked me this. And now when I reflect back on that experience, I always think about the context. I always think about how I felt in that moment, and also everything else that was going on in my life at that time as well, because 16 was quite a pivotal age for me. But I just think, would he have done that differently now, knowing what he should know about the South Asian community and how disability faces an even further sense of stigma?
One of the other questions I like kind of drawing out is understanding the ways in which our value systems are part of our daily life. We don't really think too much about that because we kind of just accept that we believe things a certain way, but we don't really think about how that belief translates into daily life. So I wanted to start off with a basic understanding for what your values are. And if I could ask you to kind of answer or respond to the phrase, I believe in, because, and it doesn't have to be necessarily religious beliefs, it can be whatever value system you hold dear to yourself. And then give us a kind of understanding of why you believe that way.
I believe in the value of equity because I believe that everybody should have access to the same opportunities in life. And I don't believe that depending on your personal characteristics, that should define how far you get in life. And I was born into a family that practices Sikhism as a religion. And Sikhism is a religion that is based upon equality. So from a very young age, I've had these values instilled into me as a child, but also in a culture that practices it. But then I've also had the irony of it being very contradictory as well. But I've been able to take the good things out of that and the good things out of those learnings from a religious perspective, but also on a community level as well, and what that's meant for me. And I think, when life's felt really hard, when my work's tough, when I'm faced with lots of different barriers, it's my faith that gives me that strength to carry on and to do the work that I'm doing. And it reminds me of why this work's so important, even though it is incredibly hard, not only when you experience, inequality on every level in many different areas of your life, but then you're working inside the system to change it as well. That's what gives me that faith and the courage, I guess, to carry on when it's hard.
So you and I are here presenting at the European Digital Youth Summit. Neither of us are particularly youthful, but it's beautiful that we were invited and we had the chance to reconnect here. And one of the things I got out of hearing your presentation today was this need, or we could even just say it's a demand, that we all have a responsibility to contribute to a more inclusive society. So I don't want to turn this back on you, but I do want to hear, in what ways do you work, do you find solutions to enabling other people to participate in society on an equal basis with others, rather than being necessarily a recipient of inclusive design, but in what ways are you applying that to your daily life and your work? And I'm thinking specifically here around the job opportunity that you advertised recently on social media, because I know you put a lot of work into how the language you use and things like that. So maybe we could start with that as an example, but if other ideas come up, I would love to hear.
I always look for ways that I live my life to make everything that I do inclusive, whether it's organising an event, writing a job description, getting friends together. I always make sure we're going somewhere accessible and it meets everybody's needs, for example. So even taking work out of the equation, even in my social or personal life, I practice those values that I teach and ask everybody else to live by. So I'm currently hiring a role for a business assistant. It's a pretty big deal for me, considering I was someone that actually really struggled to get a part-time job. I'm now in a position where I'm able to hire somebody else. So I've been really reflecting on my practice of being actively anti-ableist. So what I mean by that is understanding the language that I'm using, understanding terminology, certain preferences that I may have had that actually could have been quite ableist, because I truly believe that as individuals we've got to all unlearn so many things that we've picked up or have been taught in our lives or picked up from the environments that we live in. So I was really intentional with the language that I used. For example, when I was at the end of the job application, I initially wrote, if you don't meet all of the criteria, I would still love to hear from you. And then actually I corrected myself, because not everybody has the ability to hear. And I know that people that can't hear won't ultimately be offended by me using that language. But I wanted to go a step further and use language that was inclusive, because I can do that within my power. It's easy for me to do. So I changed that language and said, I would still love you to make this application. So it was something really simple, but it just goes to show that when we talk about inclusion and making change and ways in which we can make other people feel included, it's not that difficult if you're really intentional about it.
All right, so one of the other things I really like talking about is the ways in which we put our ideals into practice. How do we translate a vision in our head of what we think society should be like to something that actually is practical? And another thing that you and I have kind of gone over and over again is how much work there is to do in this space, and how neither of us are going to be ever want for work, because we've only scratched the surface when it comes to a lot of these issues. So I'm just wondering, what do you see as like the big priority areas? What do you think, what are you planning on doing in the next stage of your life to kind of help advance things and to put your value system into your work and into your life?
So I specialise in disability inclusion, and disability is the most overlooked area when we talk about diversity and inclusion. even though disability is the largest diversity strand in the world. So I'm looking at ways now in which I can build more processes into the work that I do and how I can automate it a little bit more as well. So I'm looking at creating a course. I've got an idea to write a book as well that I'm currently working on. But in terms of translating the value into action, I'm often met with people that just have a lot of apathy towards inclusion or towards understanding why, equity, diversity, and inclusion is so important, especially in the workplace. So a lot of my emotional energy and time is spent on that side of work. So I think as D&I professionals, we all need to acknowledge that and understand that that's where we need to put our efforts and energy, because it's really easy for certain types of people to just overlook it and think it's not important. But then we get emotionally, mentally exhausted because we care so much about this and we desperately want this change to happen now, that we burn out. So I'm still figuring out, a better way of doing this. And if anybody else out there has cracked the code, then let us know. I think we'd both love to know that, wouldn't we?
Absolutely. I know the other day you went to a spa here in Bucharest, and so it made me think here, based on your previous response, what sort of best tips do you have for self-care? What's your go-to when it comes to, I'm burnt out, I just need a space to kind of readjust or recuperate? What's your top three?
So I have certain days where I will have calls and meetings, and I block out certain days where I don't, because it's very exhausting for me to be doing that constantly, as well as consulting, as well as speaking. So I just need days where I actually don't talk to lots of people and I can just be in my zone and get whatever I need to get done. So that's one tip, is to plan your time and to create a schedule that works for you. My second tip is to schedule breaks, schedule times for joy, schedule holidays, whatever that looks like for you. For me, my escapism is travel, watching a film, going out for some good food, but schedule that into your calendar as well, because it's so easy to overlook those kind of things and think, oh, because I haven't got anything booked, I haven't got a commitment anywhere else, I'll just spend a little bit more time doing some work. So definitely build that time into your schedule. And then don't overlook the power of being connected with others. It doesn't have to be people within your industry, but just others in general. And I think it always helps when you are working with like-minded people, or perhaps you're in a situation where you aren't working with like-minded people, to find them in another space and connect with them, because it's always good to have people to talk to share ideas with, to throw ideas around. And sometimes you all need validation of whether it's an idea or someone to help you say, do you know there's a better way of doing this? So I guess what I'm saying is find like-minded people that you can really be your authentic self with.
I know you were an event planner before you chose a new path in your career, and I wonder if you could take us back to that turning point. Yeah. What was that day, minute, week, month, what was that year like for you? Tell us that story.
Yeah. It was a career that I really loved, but I just got fed up with the lack of diversity amongst the disability representation that I was seeing at that time. I then realised that the decision makers and policy makers that were affecting my life, decisions that would affect me, were not really taking into consideration diversity when it came to disability in their approaches either. And then I realised just how much of a further sense of stigma disability had in my community. I always knew it was there, but it wasn't until I met somebody who was 10 years younger than me that had gone through a very similar experience of facing the same types of barriers. And I just questioned myself. I was like, why hasn't anything changed? But then I thought, well, what have I seen change in my life so far? Have I seen diverse voices in disability? And the answer was no. And then I realised, well, actually, if I want to see this change and it hasn't happened in 30 years, then why don't I be part of that change? I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know how to go about it. Nobody was really opening any doors for me. But it all really started just by campaigning and just sharing my experience. So I was just being me, and I was just being honest and authentic. And if there was ever a tip that I could share with anybody, it would always be that, is whatever journey you're on, whatever you're trying to achieve, if you stay true to who you are and let your personality shine, then good things will happen, because people buy into people, and the more authentic you are, the better that you'll be able to connect with others. So yeah, my journey into disability activism, it wasn't an overnight journey. It in fact started by having a full-time job and me doing this after work and, just whenever I had some spare time. And I was really looking for a way to make this my full-time career. So yeah, it's definitely been a journey in itself.
Speaking of that journey, I wonder if you could go back in time to, let's say, when you were 5 years old, and tell me what kind of advice you would give to your 5-year-old self.
I love this question, but it's also a really hard question, I think, to answer. So thinking back to when I was 5 years old, I was a full-time wheelchair user. I was attending a special needs primary school. I would spend long spells of time alone in hospital because I'd be breaking bones. I think the advice that I would give myself is that you're going to be okay. It's all going to work out, and don't ever be afraid to dream big, because whatever you want is achievable in life if you're willing to have courage and work hard for it.
I want to wrap up by saying thank you, but also can you tell all the people who are listening and watching how they can reach you, what kind of work you want to do to collaborate, or anything that they might need to know to get in touch?
Sure. So you can connect with me in many ways on social media. It's at Shani Dhanda or shanidhanda.com. I love LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on there. And I'm up for all types of collaboration, as long as it aligns with my purpose, which is to help create a fairer world for everybody. Then I'm open to pretty much everything. So yeah, if that sounds like something that you're working on, then I look forward to hearing from you.
That's absolutely brilliant. And the floor is yours. Anything else you want to leave people listening, watching? Any other words of wisdom or anything we haven't talked about that we should be talking about?
I think the words of wisdom that I would like to share with everybody is that true inclusion is intersectional. It's such a simple statement to say, but for some reason, lots of people find this a really hard thing to achieve. But the simple hack in this is to include all communities when you're designing a product, a space, a service, when you're making a decision. Just involve everyone who could ever potentially be affected by that decision.